On this episode, we begin a new chapter, chapter 12, on 10-minute Bible study, wherein we're studying the Gospel of John in 10-minute, easily digestible bites 5 times a week. In the previous chapter, we saw hints of Jesus' public ministry coming to an end. In chapter 12, we see Jesus' last words and acts to the general public. John has selected 3 final public incidents for us to hear in this chapter: the anointing at Bethany, the triumphal entry, and finally, the visit from those Greeks that said, "Sir, we would like to see Jesus." He began to examine by the anointing of Jesus at Bethany. And I think I'm just going to read the whole story to start. It's well known, and I bet you can almost tell it as you hear it. John 12, verses 1 to 8. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus therefore came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, when Jesus has raised from the dead. So they gave a dinner for him there. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those reclining with him at the table. Martha therefore took a pound of expensive ointment made from pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. The house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of the disciples, who was about to betray him, said, "Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" He said this not because he cared about the poor, but because he was a thief, and having charge of the money bag, he used to help himself to what was put into it. Jesus said, "Leave her alone, so that she may keep it for the day of my burial. For the poor you will always have with you, but you do not always have me." Now there are 4 different accounts of Jesus being anointed in the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all report a scene where Jesus was anointed at a dinner. How do they compare with each other? Well, lucky for you, I had the temerity to buy this book back in 1984 for $25. Synopsis of the 4 Gospels by Kurt Aland. Today it cost about $100, and my classmates thought I was crazy and stupid to spend that much money on a book. "You'll never use it," they said. But then they were often knocking on my door so that they might borrow it and use it themselves, which I would give it to them, but only after they apologized for making fun of me. True, I use this only maybe 2 or 3 times a year, but it has proved itself invaluable over the years. What it does is it takes all 4 Gospels, and I don't know if you can see this, but you might be able to see it. It takes all 4 Gospels and puts them in column form. And then it's organized by the different things that happened, not necessarily by just running through the book. So you'll have, like this Bethany account, it has Matthew's version, Mark's, Luke, John's version, and Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, so that you can look at them all together. And in that way, it's quite wonderful to do that. Now, people often ask why we need 4 Gospels. And the answer that I always give is, why do we have a 4-man umpire crew for a baseball game? It's angles, man. It's all about the different angles. Different angles philosophically, different angles racially, or not racially, but culturally, and just different angles in general, which helps us to get a much fuller picture of Jesus. So we're using this. Let's dig into this scene where Jesus is anointed at a dinner and see what we can gather. John 12, 1 to 8 has Jesus being served a dinner in Bethany by Martha, the woman who attended to his feet was Mary. She anointed his feet with pure nard ointment and then dried his feet with her hair. We have at the end of it Judas complaining about the cost and how the nard was worth 300 denarii and could have been sold to help the poor. Matthew 26, 6-13 says that it happened in Bethany at the house of Simon the leper. It has a woman coming with very expensive ointment and anointing Jesus' head as he sat at the table. The disciples become indignant, and they talk about a large sum of money that the jar of ointment cost, and it could have been helped to give to the poor. Mark chapter 14, verses 3-9, says that it happened at Bethany, at the house of Simon the leper, and it has a woman with an alabaster flask of ointment, which was called pure nard. And she anointed Jesus' head. Some of the disciples became indignant and talked about 300 denarii that it would cost to buy that and how it should be given to the poor. And then finally, we get to Luke, which is way different and different story. Luke 7, 36-50. We learn that the dinner took place at a Pharisee's home. The woman brought a flask of ointment. She first wet Jesus' feet with her tears, dried it with her hair, and then applied ointment to his feet. Then the Pharisee said, "If this man were a prophet, he'd know what kind of woman was touching him," and implying that she was a prostitute. Now, the way it looks to me, Luke is a standalone. It's a completely different story. Not only is it different in content, it's different in timing. The first three, Matthew, Mark, and Matthew, Mark, and John, have this event happening at the end of Jesus' public ministry, whereas Luke has it early, Luke chapter 7, early in Jesus' ministry, shortly after his temptation. So Luke is a different story. However, John, Matthew, and Mark are really, I think, the same story. John, Matthew, and Mark all have it taking place at Bethany. All have a disturbance among the disciples over the cost. Matthew refers to it as a large sum, but both Mark and John mention the 300 denarii. Like John, Mark refers to it as pure nard, the ointment in question. John, Matthew, and Mark are no doubt the same account. There are two apparent problems, however. While John has the woman anointing Jesus' feet, Matthew and Mark have her anointing Jesus' head. This could be a result of those umpire angles I was telling you. Could be that John was nearer to Jesus, and the only anointing he saw, like he was at the Last Supper, John was sitting next to Jesus at the Last Supper too, and the only angle that he really noticed was her anointing his feet. Matthew and Mark maybe could have been across the room, maybe across the table, and all they saw was her anointing his head. And so here we have an example of the fuller account. Jesus' head was anointed and Jesus' feet was anointed in the same event. Now the other problem is that John's account says that they made a supper for Jesus in Bethany, and it seemed like it was at Martha's house because Martha was serving. But both Matthew and Mark say that the supper was in Bethany, but at the house of a man named Simon the leper. So this can be easily explained. Perhaps Simon the leper had a bigger house and enough room for Jesus and all of his disciples. And perhaps he had he's no longer a leper because Jesus had healed him. Both Mary and Martha, and then Lazarus and Simon the leper decided to throw a dinner for Jesus. They decided to do it at Simon's house, and Martha was simply being Martha and was helping with the serving. So, I believe that John, Matthew, and Mark are all talking about the same event, from different camera angles. Next time, we're going to get into the details of John's version of it, which is the book that we're studying. We're going to learn a little bit about what nard is. I know it's a burning question for you.